There is a region at the bottom of Missouri that does not belong there, not geologically, not culturally, not climatically. It is flatter than the rest of the state, hotter. It sits in the Mississippi River floodplain, not the Ozark Highlands. The people who settled it came from the deep south and built a cotton economy with sharecroppers. When residents describe where they live, most say they are in the Mid-South or the Delta. Almost none say the Midwest. The Missouri Bootheel, 3 counties jutting south of the state's straight border like a misshapen heel, exists for one reason. A single landowner in 1818 lobbied hard enough to get the United States government to redraw the map. And in the 2 centuries since, this sliver of Mississippi bottomland has been the site of some of the most extraordinary, violent, forgotten, and outright unbelievable events in American history. These are 27 facts about the Missouri Bootheel that sound completely made up. Everyone is real. Fact 1. The Bootheel only exists because one man refused to be in Arkansas. When Missouri drew up its statehood petition in 1818, the proposed southern border ran straight at the 36 degrees 30 minutes latitude line. That border would have put John Hardeman Walker's land in the Arkansas Territory. Walker, a Tennessee-born cattleman, lobbied Congress to bend the border south and east to include his holdings in Missouri. Nobody in Washington could prove exactly how he pulled it off. The border was redrawn. Missouri gained 980 square miles it was not supposed to have, and Walker became the first sheriff of New Madrid County. Fact 2. Walker only had land to lobby with because he stayed when everyone else ran. On December 16, 1811, earthquakes so powerful they remain the strongest ever recorded east of the Rocky Mountains tore through New Madrid. Most settlers fled. Walker saw collapsing land prices and stayed, buying up acreage from people desperate to leave. Within a few years, he was the largest landowner in the region and known locally as the Czar of the Bootheel. Subscribe right now, hit the button and the bell. Fact 3. The 1811 New Madrid earthquake rang church bells in Boston. Not a figure of speech. The seismic waves traveled over 1,000 miles through the continuous bedrock of the eastern United States and were strong enough to set bell towers swinging in Massachusetts. President Madison felt the shaking at the White House in Washington. Chimneys fell in Cincinnati, 360 miles from the epicenter. Pavement cracked in Charleston, South Carolina. The shaking was felt as far north as Canada and as far south as the Gulf Coast. The affected area of strong shaking was 10 times larger than the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, yet the Bootheel was so sparsely populated that the death toll was never accurately counted. Fact 4. The Mississippi River ran backward. On February 7, 1812, the final and largest earthquake struck with an estimated magnitude of up to 8.8. Flatboat operators reported the river reversed direction and flowed upstream for several hours. The riverbed deforming so violently, it pushed the water back against its own current. In the Bootheel's entire recorded history, the river has run backward once. Fact 5. The earthquake created an entirely new lake overnight. The February 7th event caused massive land subsidence in northwest Tennessee. Water poured in and never drained. Reelfoot Lake, 18 miles long and 5 miles wide, did not exist before that morning and has existed continuously ever since. Fact 6. Between 6,000 and 10,000 individual earthquakes struck the Bootheel region between December 1811 and April 1812. The ground was in near constant motion for 4 months. The town of New Madrid was destroyed in the final earthquake. All but 2 families abandoned it. Fact 7. The Bootheel sits on a fault that FEMA considers the most dangerous earthquake risk in the United States outside California. A repeat of the 1811 event today would cause what federal planners describe as the highest economic losses from any natural disaster in American history, destroying bridges, collapsing levees, cutting power and water to millions across 8 states. The fault has not moved significantly since 1812. That pressure has been building for over 200 years. Fact 8. The topsoil in the Bootheel is 30 to 60 feet deep in places. This is not a typo. 60 feet of rich black sediment deposited over thousands of years by the Mississippi River floodplain, soil so dense and productive that the Bootheel counties generate nearly a third of Missouri's entire agricultural income on a fraction of the state's land area. The soil produces some of the highest crop yields per acre in the entire country. The counties that sit on it are among the poorest in Missouri. That gap between what the land produces and what the people living on it receive has existed in one form or another since the first cotton planters arrived. Fact 9. Before the 20th century, most of the Bootheel was swamp. The extraordinarily fertile farmland that exists today was underwater. Between the 1880s and the 1930s, developers drained the entire region using a network of ditches, canals, and levees that constitutes one of the largest land drainage projects in American history. 85% of the native forests were cleared in the process. The landscape was physically rebuilt from the ground up to become a farm. And then the outside investors who financed the drainage held the land, and the people who worked it farmed for shares. Fact 10. The Bootheel is the only part of Missouri that lies in the Sun Belt. The rest of Missouri sits above the 36 degrees 30 minutes latitude line. The Bootheel hangs below it. Climatically and geographically, it belongs with Memphis and the Mississippi Delta, not the Show Me State. Fact 11. Sheryl Crow was born in Kennett, Missouri, the largest city in the Bootheel. She grew up in a region so flat and southern that calling it Midwestern feels wrong. Kennett is also the birthplace of country singer David Nail and rockabilly singer Narvel Feltz, whose music played worldwide for decades from a town most people can't place on a map. Hit the like button. It helps more people find this. Fact 12. In January 1939, more than 1,500 men, women, and children, black and white sharecroppers together, camped on the shoulders of Highway 60 and 61 in freezing temperatures to protest landlords who had evicted them rather than comply with a New Deal requirement to share federal relief payments with the tenants who worked their land. It was one of the first integrated protests against economic injustice in American history, predating the organized civil rights movement by 15 years. The state eventually forced them off the roads on public health grounds. Federal agencies built temporary housing for some of the most desperate families. Many of the rest never found permanent housing again. Fact 13. 3/4 of all Bootheel farms in 1935 were still operated by tenants rather than owners. Most of those tenants were black. The cotton plantation ownership structure, established before the Civil War, persisted through emancipation, through mechanization, through every New Deal program designed to address rural poverty, and into the present. The Farm Security Administration surveyed the Bootheel during the Depression and described what it found in 4 words: rich land, poor people. Fact 14. The organizer of the 1939 protest, Reverend Owen Whitfield, received death threats and had to be hidden in a white sympathizer's barn for months before fleeing to St. Louis. While in hiding, he secretly traveled north and met with President Roosevelt, who agreed to help. The federal government built 10 housing villages across the Bootheel for displaced families. Most are gone now. Fact 15. Ulysses S. Grant fought his very first battle as a field commander in the Missouri Bootheel. The Battle of Belmont in November 1861, fought on the Missouri side of the Mississippi River in Mississippi County, was Grant's introduction to independent command. He made significant tactical errors, launched his men across open ground without adequate reconnaissance, and barely extracted his force when a Confederate counterattack nearly cut off his retreat to the river. He later wrote that the experience taught him more about war than any amount of reading or training could. Grant went on to command the Union armies to victory in the Civil War. His education as a commander started in the Bootheel swamps. Fact 16. A Confederate guerrilla known as the Swamp Fox of the Confederacy operated out of the Bootheel throughout the Civil War. General M. Jeff Thompson led irregular forces through the swamps and bottomland so effectively that Union armies with vastly superior numbers could never pin him down. The region's remoteness, settlements along riverbanks miles from paved roads, accessible only by flat-bottomed boat during flood season, made it the most difficult guerrilla terrain in Missouri. Thompson's legend grew large enough that Missouri school children were taught about him for decades after the war ended. Fact 17. The Bootheel once had a reputation for open lawlessness. The rest of Missouri quietly accepted. Remote river settlements became centers of moonshining and bootlegging. During Prohibition, the region fed whiskey into multiple states through waterway networks federal agents couldn't patrol. The reputation lasted well past Prohibition's end, and in some parts of the region was well earned into the mid-20th century. Fact 18. The Bootheel produces nearly one-third of Missouri's entire agricultural income on a fraction of the state's land. Soybeans, cotton, rice, corn, the Bootheel counties along the Little River Drainage District consistently lead Missouri in commodity crop output. Its residents remain among the poorest in the state. The paradox the federal government documented in 1935, rich land, poor people, has not been resolved. It has been sustained for 90 years and counting. Fact 19. Pemiscot County at the very tip has a black population of around 26%, one of the highest of any rural Missouri county, a direct demographic legacy of the sharecropper era. It is also one of the poorest counties in the state, with poverty rates near the bottom of Missouri statistics year after year. Fact 20. The Bootheel is culturally considered part of the Mississippi Delta music tradition, the same territory that gave the world the Delta blues, the flat alluvial bottomland, the black labor force brought in to work it, the isolation, the poverty, and the musical tradition that grew from all of those conditions extended north into Missouri, just as surely as it extended south through Arkansas and into Mississippi. Kennett, Caruthersville, Sikeston, these Bootheel towns sit on the same cultural and geological foundation as Clarksdale and Helena. The blues did not stop at the state line. Fact 21. Sikeston, Missouri was the site of a documented lynching in 1942. Cleo Wright, a black man accused of attacking a white woman, was taken from police custody by a mob, tied to a car, dragged through the city's black neighborhood, and burned alive in front of his church while hundreds of people watched. The FBI investigated under pressure from civil rights organizations. No one was ever charged. The case drew national attention and international condemnation at a moment when the United States was asking black soldiers to fight and die overseas for freedoms they did not possess on a Bootheel highway. Fact 22. The Bootheel grows rice. The irrigated bottomlands, particularly Butler and Stoddard counties, have grown rice commercially since the early 20th century. The state's only rice mill opened in New Madrid in 1988. The crop most Americans associate with Louisiana has been growing in Missouri for over 100 years. Fact 23. The Bootheel is the only part of Missouri that regularly grows cotton. The crop the Arkansas planters brought north never fully left. Fact 24. The Bootheel's lowest point is in Dunklin County near R. Bird, 230 feet above sea level. Fact 25. The first steamboat in American history to travel the western waters navigated through the New Madrid Earthquake zone during the earthquakes themselves. The New Orleans, captained by Nicholas Roosevelt, passed through in December 1811 while the ground shook continuously around it. The crew felt the earthquakes through the hull of the boat. Islands they had noted on the upstream journey had disappeared by the time they passed the same location going south. Riverbanks they had tied to overnight had collapsed into the water. The crew celebrated a wedding aboard on New Year's Eve, while aftershocks continued. They arrived in New Orleans safely in January 1812, completing the first successful steamboat voyage on the Mississippi, while one of the greatest natural disasters in American history unfolded around them. Fact 26. The New Madrid seismic zone has produced major earthquakes at roughly 200 to 500-year intervals, through the geological record going back thousands of years. The last sequence was 1811 and 1812. Scientists estimate a 7 to 10% chance of a repeat magnitude event in the next 50 years and a 25 to 40% chance of a magnitude 6 or greater in that same window. It has been over 200 years. Fact 27. The Bootheel is one of the richest agricultural regions in Missouri. One of the poorest communities in Missouri, sits on the most dangerous active fault system east of California, produces a third of the state's farm income, while returning almost none of it to the people who live there, grows cotton and rice in a state nobody associates with either crop, and was added to Missouri entirely because one man refused to be in Arkansas. It has been sitting at the bottom of the state, shaped like a boot heel pressing down for over 200 years. That is not one fact. That is what the Bootheel is. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell. Drop a comment. Which of these surprised you most? Thank you for watching. The truth doesn't shout. It waits for you to look closer.